Hours after Madeleine McCann disappeared, the most important piece of evidence to find her abductor was deliberately destroyed, and the person who destroyed it was her own mother, Kate McCann. This isn't a theory. It's a documented fact in the Portuguese investigation, a fact so shocking and so inconvenient that most reports on the case prefer to mention it only in passing, like a strange footnote. But it wasn't a footnote, it was the epicenter, the act that defines everything that comes after. And in this video, we're going to put that moment under a microscope. We're going to dissect what was done, why it was done, and how this act of destruction became the key to a truth far darker than a simple abduction. But before we dive into the abyss, we need to return to the surface, to the story we all know, the story that was sold to the world as a picture postcard turned nightmare. Praia da Luz, Portugal, May 2007. A paradise for British families, a haven of sun and tranquility. At the center of our stage, we have the McCanns, Jerry and Kate, two respected doctors, the very picture of success and stability. With them, their three young children, including the star of this tragedy, Madeleine, a 3-year-old girl with unmistakable eyes. They were part of a group of friends, the Tapas 7. Every night, the ritual was the same. The children slept in the ground floor apartments, while the parents dined at a tapas restaurant about 50 meters away, close enough to feel safe, yet far enough for the unthinkable to happen. On the night of May 3rd, the routine shatters. Around 10 o'clock at night, Kate McCann goes to check on her children and finds the room empty, Madeleine's bed empty, the window open. What follows is the chaos the world watched live. A mother's scream echoing through the Portuguese night. They've taken her. The frantic search by parents and friends throughout the resort. The arrival of an unprepared local police force, treating what was a crime scene like a simple case of a lost child. The official narrative was written that very night. An abductor, a phantom, entered through the window and stole an innocent child from her bed while her parents dined just meters away. A horror story, simple, direct, and terrifyingly effective. Her story that mobilized the world, that plastered Madeleine's face on every corner of the planet, and that turned her parents into symbols of unimaginable pain. That's the story that went around the world. And speaking of the world, I'm curious, what time is it where you're watching? Leave a comment below. It's always fascinating to see how our community of investigators is spread across every corner of the globe, united in the search for truth no matter the time zone. Now, let's go back to apartment 5A, because it's there, behind the curtain of the official narrative, that the real story begins. The story of an abductor who enters through the window is powerful. But what if it's a lie? What if the window wasn't the point of entry, but a piece of stagecraft? What if there was no abductor at all? What if the tragedy that happened in that apartment was far more intimate, far more domestic, and demanded not a desperate search, but a desperate cover-up? That is the thesis we are going to investigate thoroughly. The thesis that there was no abduction, but an accidental death inside the apartment, followed by a frantic plan to hide the body and create a false narrative. The promise I make to you is this. By the end of this video, you will understand that Kate McCann's washing of that crucial piece of evidence was not the random act of a mother in shock. It was a logical and necessary step in the sequence of a cover-up. We will connect the dots that the original investigation and the media refused to connect, showing how every strange action by the parents makes perfect sense when you stop looking for an abductor and start looking for a secret. But to prove this was a cover-up, we first need to demolish the story they told, and the demolition begins at the crime scene. A place with secrets that go far beyond a simple open window. Welcome back to apartment 5A. The official story left us with a clear image, an open window, a missing child, an abduction. Now let's take that image and shatter it into 1,000 pieces, because when you look closely, the crime scene doesn't tell the story of a break-in. It screams that something is fundamentally wrong with the narrative. The first piece that doesn't fit is the window itself. They said the abductor entered and exited through it. But the forensic analysis, even the one done late and poorly, found not a single trace of a stranger. No fingerprints other than the family's, no clothing fibers, no stray hairs, no footprints outside in the flower bed just below. The window was opened from the inside, and the shutters were raised. For an abductor to do this without leaving a single trace, they would have to be a ghost. But the strangest detail, the one most people don't know, is that the window could only be opened from the inside. Furthermore, to open it, you first had to open the metal shutters, which, according to Kate herself, were closed when she put the children to bed. The sound of those metal shutters opening is not subtle. It's a noise that would likely wake anyone in the room. They said the patio door at the back of the apartment was unlocked. Jerry McCann admitted he wasn't sure if he had locked it that night. This opens a door literally to a much simpler theory. No one needed to force their way in. Whoever left with Madeleine was likely already inside or had easy access. The open window narrative starts to look less like evidence and more like a distraction, a magic trick to make everyone look in the wrong place. And while the police and the world looked at the window, the crime scene was violated in an almost unbelievable way. In the following hours and days, dozens of people, friends, resort staff, neighbors, police officers, walked in and out of that apartment. They touched everything. They contaminated everything. It's as if someone took a book with the solution to a mystery and ripped out all the pages one by one. Any evidence an abductor might have left was drowned in a sea of other people's DNA. The crime scene wasn't just contaminated, it was methodically erased. And this cleanup leads us directly to the theater of the witnesses. If the physical evidence is a swamp, the human evidence is a hall of mirrors. The statements from the Tapa 7, the group of friends dining with the McCanns, are filled with contradictions so glaring, it's hard to believe they were all on the same planet that night, let alone at the same dinner table. Let's start with the dinner contradiction. They claim they performed regular checks on the children, but when the police asked each of them to detail the times, the house of cards collapsed. The timelines didn't match. People who claimed to have checked on the children at a certain time were contradicted by others who said they never left the table. The timeline they presented was a mess, a collective alibi so fragile it falls apart with the slightest pressure. Then we have the phantom sighting. One of the friends, Jane Tanner, claimed to have seen a man carrying a child in pajamas around 9:15 p.m. This became the main sighting of the abductor. For months, the police pursued this lead. But there's a problem, a big problem. Jerry McCann, Madeleine's father, admitted in his own diary that he crossed paths with Jane Tanner at that exact time in the same location, while returning from one of his checks. He was talking to another man and carrying one of his other children. The description matches. The key witness herself may have unknowingly seen the girl's own father, creating the image of the abductor from a coincidence. The sighting that propped up the abduction theory for so long may be nothing more than an illusion. And finally, the irregular checks. Jerry McCann himself said he went to check on the children around 9:05 p.m. He entered the apartment, saw that the children's bedroom door was more open than he remembered leaving it, but thought nothing of it. He looked at the beds, saw his children were fine, and left. He didn't notice the open window, didn't notice the raised shutter, didn't notice his daughter's absence? According to him, no. Less than an hour later, Kate enters the same room and panic sets in. Jerry's version of this check is one of the biggest black holes in the entire investigation. Either he was the most unobservant person in the world, or he's not telling the whole story. Their story simply doesn't add up. What do you think is the most glaring inconsistency so far? The testimony about the window or the confusing dinner timelines? Leave your investigator's opinion in the comments below. This community's theories often see what others ignore. While the humans were telling confusing stories, science was waiting silently to give its version. And when it arrived, it was devastating for the official narrative. Months later, the Portuguese police, frustrated with the lack of progress, brought in two silent heroes from England, Eddie and Keela, two highly trained Springer Spaniels. One was trained to detect the scent of a cadaver, the other to detect traces of human blood, even if it had been cleaned up. What they found demolished the abduction theory. Inside apartment 5A, behind a sofa in the living room, the cadaver dog gave a strong, unequivocal alert. It meant that at some point, a decomposing human body had been in that spot. But an abductor wouldn't have killed the girl there only to carry her out later. It makes no sense. The blood dog also alerted in the same apartment. Traces of blood that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. The dogs were taken to inspect the McCanns' belongings. And that's when the case was turned upside down. In the trunk of the Renault Scenic that the McCanns rented 25 days after, Madeleine's disappearance, the cadaver dog, gave another very strong alert. The scent of death was ingrained in the car, and then the final blow. The dogs inspected Kate McCann's clothes, and there on clothes she wore after the disappearance, the cadaver dog alerted again. To top it off, the dog also alerted on Madeleine's favorite toy, the Cuddle Cat, the very same stuffed animal that Kate made a point of washing right after the disappearance. Even after being washed, the dog detected the odor of death. Science was screaming that a body had been there. In the apartment, in the car rented weeks later, on the mother's clothes, on that toy. A truth that cannot be ignored. So if the abduction story is a sham, what really happened that night? To answer that, we need to do what the police never did. Reconstruct the night of the crime based on evidence, not fiction. Science left a trail of breadcrumbs that points in a single direction. Now let's follow that trail. Forget the story of the phantom abductor. Forget the window. The night of May 3rd, 2007 likely unfolded in a much more tragic and much more human way. The night begins as they described, friends dining, children sleeping. But there's a crucial detail many ignore. The McCanns, according to reports, administered mild sedatives like antihistamines to help their children sleep. There's nothing inherently sinister about this. Many parents do it, but this practice introduces an element of risk, a slightly larger dose, an unexpected reaction. Our reconstruction begins around 9 o'clock. Jerry McCann does his check. He enters the apartment. But contrary to what he said, he doesn't find everything fine. He finds a parent's worst nightmare. Madeleine is unresponsive, perhaps from an accidental overdose of the sedative, perhaps from a fall or a household accident. No one heard. The exact cause of death becomes secondary to the fact itself. The girl is dead. Panic sets in. But it's not the kind of panic that leads to a cry for help. It's a different kind of panic. The panic of two respected doctors, of a perfect family now facing ruin. Negligence would be exposed, their careers destroyed, their lives over, and in that moment of absolute terror, a terrible decision is made. Not to seek help, but to hide the truth. The plan begins to form. The first thing is to buy time and hide the body. Madeleine's body is moved from the bedroom. To where? Perhaps to the parents' wardrobe. Perhaps wrapped in a sheet. It is hidden within the apartment itself. This explains why the cadaver dog, Eddie, alerted inside the apartment behind the sofa. A body had been there. Meanwhile, the theater continues. The dinner proceeds. The friends' checks become the construction of a collective, albeit confusing and contradictory alibi. Every minute that passes is another minute for the story to solidify. Then at 10 o'clock, Kate executes the second part of the plan. She goes to the room and discovers the disappearance. The cry, "They've taken her," is not a complete lie. She has been taken, but not by a stranger. It's the performance that kicks off the abduction narrative. The window is opened from the inside, the shutter raised, setting the stage for the drama. The ensuing chaos is the perfect smokescreen. While everyone is outside looking for a living child, no one thinks to look for a body inside. In the following hours and days, the cover-up plan continues. The body needs to be moved to a final location, and this is where the Renault Scenic, rented 25 days later, comes into play. The car becomes a hearse on wheels. The body, perhaps stored in a suitcase or a cooler, is finally transported to its final resting place. This is why the sniffer dogs alerted so strongly in the trunk of that car. The scent of death traveled with them. This brings us to the psychology behind the mask. Why do this? The answer is fear. Not fear of an abductor, but fear of exposure. For people whose identity is built on an image of competence and perfection, two doctors at the top of their careers, admitting to such a catastrophic failure is a psychological death. The cover-up is not born of malice, but of a self-preservation instinct taken to the extreme. It's what psychologists call commitment bias. Once you tell the first lie, each subsequent lie becomes easier, more necessary to sustain the previous one. The initial plan of "let's just say she disappeared" escalates into a complex web of deceit, involving global media, celebrities, and even governments. They are no longer just hiding a body. They are protecting a lie that has become bigger than them. So far, does this reconstruction of events seem more plausible than the story of a phantom abductor? Does the psychology of fear and self-preservation better explain their actions than the pain of grief? Tell me in the comments if the pieces are starting to fit for you. Because the evidence I'm about to show you is not a theory, here's the proof that seals this case. The definitive proof, the smoking gun in this case, is not the dog's alerts as powerful as they are. It's something that forensic science found, and that the McCanns' defense has never been able to convincingly explain. In the trunk of the Renault Scenic, forensic experts collected several hair samples. Most were from the family, which was to be expected. But one sample was different. It was a hair that, according to mitochondrial DNA analysis, was potentially Madeleine's. But the most shocking thing wasn't where the hair came from, but its condition. The British laboratory that analyzed the sample, the FSS, described the hair as exhibiting signs of post-mortem decomposition, and more specifically, they found evidence that the hair had detached from the body after death. But the most damning part is this. The lab found a complete absence of a root. Hairs that naturally fall from a living person almost always have a root or hair bulb. The total absence of a root is a characteristic of hair that comes from a decomposing corpse. And to seal the argument, this hair sample was found along with bodily fluids that the sniffer dogs identified as coming from a cadaver. You have the scent of death, fluids from a body, and a hair that science says fell from a dead body. All of this in the trunk of a car rented weeks after the disappearance. This evidence makes the abduction story virtually impossible. There is no way an abductor could place a hair from Madeleine's corpse in the family's car weeks later. The only logical explanation is that Madeleine's body was in that trunk. It's the piece that connects the death in the apartment to the transport of the body. It's the physical proof that validates the reconstruction of events. With the proof on the table, the question changes. It's no longer what happened to Madeleine, but who helped hide the truth. The answer involves a conspiracy much larger than just a panicked couple. It involves the power of an entire state. We had the science. We had the contradictions. We had a trail that led directly to an uncomfortable conclusion. The Portuguese police, led by Detective Gonçalo Amaral, reached this same conclusion. In September 2007, they named Kate and Jerry McCann as arguidos, the equivalent of formal suspects. The case seemed to be heading towards a resolution, but then something strange happened. The truth met an enemy far more powerful than a couple of doctors, the system. From the moment the McCanns were named suspects, a public relations and political pressure machine, funded by millions in donations, kicked into high gear. The British government, under then Prime Minister Gordon Brown, began to exert unprecedented diplomatic pressure on Portugal. The case ceased to be a criminal investigation and became an international incident. Because of the British pressure, the consequence was that the Portuguese investigation began to be sabotaged from within and without. Lines of inquiry focusing on the parents were discouraged. The British media, in particular, launched a fierce campaign to portray the McCanns as innocent victims and the Portuguese police as a bunch of cruel incompetents. The abductor narrative was reinforced with full force, drowning out any voice that dared to question it. And because the evidence from the sniffer dogs and DNA was too strong to be ignored, the strategy shifted to discrediting the science. Lawyers and experts hired by the McCanns began to attack the credibility of the dogs, saying they were unreliable. They attacked the forensic lab, questioning the DNA results. The goal was clear. If you can't refute the evidence, destroy the reputation of those who found it. And it worked. The price of truth was paid by those who dared to seek it. The primary face of this injustice is Detective Gonçalo Amaral himself. He was the man who led the investigation, who followed the evidence to its logical conclusion, and who had the courage to name the McCanns as suspects. What was his reward? He was removed from the case. He was forced into early retirement. And when he wrote a book, Maddie, The Truth of the Lie, detailing his investigation and his theory, he was sued by the McCanns for libel, silenced by injunctions, his reputation destroyed. He became the scapegoat, the symbol of what happens when you challenge people with power and influence. The system's message was clear and brutal: dare to touch the protected ones and we will destroy you. He wasn't the only victim. Other police officers who shared his suspicions were marginalized. Witnesses who provided accounts that contradicted the official narrative were ignored or ridiculed. The truth was sacrificed to protect an image, a diplomatic relationship, and the interests of powerful people. It's infuriating. It's frustrating. And that's why this channel exists. If you believe these stories of cover-ups need to be told, that the truth cannot be buried by power and money, then join this mission. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every subscription is a vote of confidence and a sign that we are not alone in this search. In the end, the system won. In July 2008, Portugal's Attorney General archived the case. Kate and Jerry McCann were cleared of their arguido status. The evidence from the dogs, the DNA, the contradictions, everything was swept under the rug. Officially, there was not enough evidence to charge anyone. But we know the truth. It wasn't for a lack of evidence, but for a lack of will. The cover-up theory is not just a theory. It is the only narrative that makes all the pieces fit. It explains the contaminated crime scene, the conflicting testimonies, the reaction to the sniffer dogs, and most importantly, the physical evidence found in the car. The Madeleine McCann case is not a mystery. It is a tragedy covered up by an injustice. Official justice was never served, not because the puzzle was impossible to solve, but because the people in power decided they didn't like the picture it formed. And so the world was left with the most convenient version, not the truest one. The anger we feel is not for an unsolved mystery, but for a truth that was deliberately buried. The system won. Justice was buried. But in the midst of all this darkness, one final, most personal question remains. What does this terrible story teach us about our own world? And what do we do with this inconvenient truth? So what do we do with this inconvenient truth? The truth that sometimes the monster isn't a stranger in the dark, but the fear that lives inside ordinary people. My final conviction, after analyzing every piece of this puzzle, is that Madeleine McCann died in that apartment, and what followed was not a search for a child, but a campaign to bury a truth. What haunts me is not just the initial tragedy, but the calculated coldness of the cover-up. The human capacity in the name of self-preservation to sacrifice a child's dignity, erase her story, and manipulate the entire world. This story is not about a mystery. It's about the anatomy of a lie that was protected by money, power, and our own willingness to believe in a simpler story. And now, after going through all of this together, I need to know what this story has awakened in you. Use the comments below not to debate, but to bear witness. Testify to your outrage. Leave a word, a sentence, that shows we have not forgotten and we do not accept the silence. I will read every comment, because in a world that wants us to be quiet, our collective voice is the only weapon we have, and this fight against silence doesn't end here. The same dynamics of power and secrets we saw in Portugal are repeated in an infamous case in the United States. In our next documentary, we will investigate how the wealth and influence of the Ramsey family may have buried the truth along with their 6-year-old daughter, John Benet. To continue on this mission with me, subscribe and turn on notifications. The search for truth cannot stop. Until next time. Remember, the truth doesn't need you to believe in it. It only needs you not to forget it.